Hello and welcome to my overall thoughts of the summer 2016 anime season. So it's that time again for me to go over all the anime I watched this season and give a few of my thoughts, and I'll also start with the same warning I do every single time I do one of these videos. If I dropped a show that you really love, I'm very fickle when it comes to anime. I drop shows fairly frequently, so chances are the problem is with me and not with the actual show. Now, like with a lot of anime fans, I like to get to 3 episodes before I drop a show because you need a fair amount of time in order to make a solid judgment, but there were 2 shows this season that didn't even make it to the 3 episode mark. The first was the new Berserk anime. I thought the first episode was dog shit and I had no intention of watching beyond that point, so there you go, nothing more to say on that. The next show is something that I'm a little bit disappointed in myself that I didn't give it more of a chance, and that is Handa-kun. I thought the first segment of this was one of the most unfunny, annoying, infuriating segments I've seen in so long. It made me want to throw up. It was that bad. And as the show went on, it did get better. Once it got into it, there was still a lot of stupid crap, but there were some cleverly written jokes. There were a few times where I even let out a few chuckles, but that stench, that awful stench of that first segment just kept hanging around and I couldn't shake it. I just couldn't bring myself to enjoy this show no matter how much I wanted to, no matter how much I wanted to admit that, hey, yeah, it has gotten better, I should give it more of a chance, but I just couldn't do it. Because of that negative bias I'd built up, I ended up dropping it somewhere in the middle of episode 2. So now we have the shows that I did watch up to episode 3, but I chose not to continue beyond that point. And the first one is Days. Oh, I have a lot to say about this. When I first started watching it, I recognised that this was not going to be very original. There was a lot of cliches, but I was okay with that. I was okay with watching a cliche sports anime story. What I was not okay with is how rushed the pacing was to the point where nothing ever felt earned. One of the main reasons I fell in love with sports anime is that I love seeing the characters struggle. I love seeing them go up against a team that's way better than them and they lose. They lose horribly, but they don't give up. Oh no. They go back, they train their asses off, and then they get a lot better. They come back and they earn that victory. They earn the right to smash down whatever obstacle was put in front of them. But with this show, whenever an obstacle was put up, it was almost immediately knocked back down again. The main character was getting too good too quickly. The team also came together way too quickly. The conflict that came up there was brought up and then resolved in the same episode. And the part that killed it for me, absolutely killed it, was when the main character asked the captain of the soccer team how to properly kick the ball hard, because he would kick it and it wouldn't go very fast. So he was like, hey, I want to kick the ball really hard and fast like you do. Can you teach me? At this point, I became pretty excited actually, because I thought this was where they were finally going to explain how to properly position your leg and how you need to follow through in order to make sure that the ball is aimed where you want it to go and that it goes really fast. I love learning about all these different techniques in all the sports. That's another reason why I became such a big fan of sports anime. So the explanation that Days gives for how to kick the ball hard is that you gotta have spirit. And that's it. That's it. That's all you need. As long as you really want to kick the ball hard, it should fly right into the net. This felt so incredibly lazy and lame that I was out. I was completely out. I dropped it and never looked back. But it was okay because there was another sports anime that I had pretty high hopes for, and that was Battering. A lot of people were really disappointed with this. It focused more on the characters than it did on baseball, and that turned a lot of people off. But with me, I loved it. I loved how they showed a realistic portrayal of young teenage life, like 13-year-old, bloody selfish as crap teenage life. And these characters, yeah, they were selfish. They were emotionally volatile. They would fight all the time. They were friends one second and enemies the next, just like actual 13-year-olds. So I gave the show a lot of respect for that. The problem was that it went too far. It went too far with the drama, and it got to the point where I thought that every single character in here was a complete dickhead. There was nobody who I could respect, nobody who I could connect with, nobody who I could get behind. And at the end of episode 3, I had a really sour taste in my mouth, but I said to myself, you know, I'll probably check out episode 4 at some point when it comes out, and I didn't. There was really no motivation for me to go back. So next up we have Taboo Tattoo, and I was extremely enthusiastic about this anime during the first episode. I thought the fast pacing was really cool, I thought the action was really cool, loved every second of it. But then in episode 2 there was this titty grabbing scene, and it was as if I snapped back to reality. I realised exactly what kind of show this was. I began to see all the flaws that I'd been kind of pushing to the side, and honestly I began to see that just everything about this show sucked. Like, the action was still pretty good, but again, when everything around it is crap, there was really no point in me continuing. So next up we have a show that admittedly I got to pretty late, Rewrite. This originally wasn't on my radar. I had no intention of watching this show, but it was recommended by one of my long-time subscribers multiple times. He actually left multiple comments about this and said that this was his anime of the season, at least at that point it was. And I'm sorry, Jake, I didn't like it. It was really bland. There was nothing in here that I hadn't seen before multiple times in other better anime, and I think the linchpin here was that the writing was giving me flashbacks to Charlotte. And that makes sense, it's from the same company, you know, it makes sense there would be similarities between the two. But the problem with that is that I always found Charlotte's writing to be pretty bad, even in the first half before everything completely went to shit. So there were a few laughs. I mean, I enjoyed a few parts, but when I didn't care about the story or the characters, I basically had no choice but to drop it. So next up we have a completely different category. These are two anime that I watched past episode 3, but I didn't quite get to the end for whatever reason, and the first one on that list is Tales of Zestiria the X. This was going along pretty well. At first, there were a few dialogue heavy segments that I wasn't really into, but I liked the characters, I liked the story, and the visuals were just beautiful. So I was liking it up until episode 5, where for some reason it became a completely different story that I didn't give a shit about, and there were a completely new set of characters that I didn't give a shit about. So guess what? I stopped giving a shit. Now, in all fairness, I knew that at some point these two plot lines were going to merge. They didn't just completely dump all the other characters and go on to new characters for no reason. Like, I knew this was going to come together, but the way they did it was so jarring that it completely tanked my enthusiasm, and I had to ask myself multiple times, do you want to see what happens next? Are you still into the show? Are you still interested to see what happens at the end? It took a while, but the answer ended up being no. So I think it was partway through episode 7 where I had to just let this go. So from there, I moved on to a slice of life anime that was picking up a fair bit of traction at that point, Munchie. This was another show that I picked up on fairly late. I didn't really think much about it when I first saw it on AniChart, but when I heard that it was from the same guy who did Aria, one of my favourite anime of all time, I said, oh, how the fuck Did I miss this? I'm so there. Ultimately though, I think my comparisons to Aria really hurt this because the setting was nowhere near as good. Aria was set on this beautiful water planet that was like a remake of Venice, and there was magical elements in there, and there was all this really cool stuff. It was so interesting to learn about, and this is set in a high school. Nothing interesting or unique about it, and the characters in Aria were so memorable. I will never forget them. And here there were a few that were okay, fairly interesting, but it's a lot of just fairly standard personalities that I've seen before. So then I just had to push the Aria comparisons to the side and say, is this worth watching on its own? Is this a worthy anime on its own? And like with Tales of Zestiria, the answer ended up being no. So I think it was episode 5 where I finally ended up dropping it. Alright, now we have the 4 anime that I watched all the way to the end. And the first one I'd like to talk about is Real Life. Now this was fine. This was perfectly okay. And I've used this word so often in the past, I don't really like bringing it up, but it describes this show to a T. Cliche. This is bog standard, nothing original and unique about it, by the book, never stepping outside the box high school drama. It was also painfully predictable, and a good example of this is when Arata is first brought into the Real Life program. He's designated as subject number 2, so then the question becomes, hey, who's subject number 1? And this is brought up a lot. There's constantly reports being put out that, hey, subject number 2 is doing way better than subject number 1 did. He's integrating into the social high school lifestyle way better than subject number 1 did. And when they started doing that, when they started pushing this really hard, I knew who subject number 1 was going to be. And at the end, sure enough, it's exactly who I thought it was. This is not me trying to brag. This is not me saying, oh, well, I recognize the ending to this before any of you plebeians ever could. No, that's not what this is about. I've watched anime for a really long time. I've seen the story beats that this anime was going through a lot of times in the past. And because of that, I was able to predict exactly where it was going. So if you're going to impress me, you're going to have to do a lot better than this. And one anime that absolutely impressed me this season was Food Wars Season 2. It has its flaws, sure. It still has things about it that I don't like, but it always found new ways to get me hyped. And it's actually kind of weird. In certain ways, it actually addressed every single problem I had, and there were only 2. There were 2 main problems I had with the first season of this show. The first major issue was that I hated the food eating scenes. They were over the top, unrealistic, and they seemed like just a lame way to throw some tits and 6-pack abs at the screen. It's like, hey, here's some fan service. They really irked me, but in season 2, there was still a lot of that. There was still just a lot of, hey, here's some of the female characters with their clothes off, but there were also a few of the food eating scenes. I think they got the idea that some of these scenes would get repetitive if it was just, orgasmic, oh my god, this is great every single time. So they got clever with it. And there were some that I found really, really funny. So big respect to the show for that. And another problem that I had was the predictability. And I'm not going to say how this season shook it because that would be getting into spoilers, but there were 2 or 3 specific instances where I had guessed where the show was going to go and it went in the completely opposite direction. So a lot of respect for that. The thing that I loved the most is the storylines that were coming up towards the end. I loved seeing all the students go to all these different restaurants and get work experience. I thought that was a really good place to go after the tournament. So I am very excited to see what season 3 brings. And then there were 2, and I went back and forth on these 2 shows trying to figure out which one was better and which one I was going to give my anime of the season award to. And It was a hard decision to make, but ultimately the runner-up ended up being The Heroic Legend of Arslan Season 2. At this point, I don't think it's any secret to anybody who's been around my channel for a while. I think you already know. I have a very short attention span, and because of that, the main way I consume my anime is through watching it in short bursts. I'll watch like 5, maybe 10 minutes of an episode, I'll pause it, I'll go off, I'll dick around on YouTube, Reddit, or just go around the internet for a bit. And then I'll come back, watch a bit more, go off, dick around, and I'll do that back and forth until I finally end up watching the whole episode. And that happened at some point with every single show I watched this season. Except for Arslan. Whenever I put on an episode, from the beginning to the end, I was absolutely hooked. I was just so enamored with the story and the characters. I loved all of them, every single one. It's so rare for me to just feel attached to such a large cast, but Arslan managed to pull it off. So with all of that, why did this only get the runner-up? Well, at the end of episode 8, I was psyched like I am with every single episode. I was like, yes, I cannot wait for episode 9. A week went by, nothing came out. Okay, maybe they took a week off or something. 2 weeks, nothing. 3 weeks, 4 weeks, still nothing. And at that point, I'm like, it's been a month. Something's wrong here. So I did a bit of research, and then I realized it's an 8-episode season. Why they would cut it that short, I don't know. Maybe there was a really long arc in the manga coming up and they couldn't find a good way to end it with only like 13 episodes, so they decided to just cut that arc out entirely and end it short at 8. That's the only reasonable explanation I can give, but it left us with a really abrupt ending. And this was a problem in the first season as well. The ending there was very abrupt. It left a bunch of hanging plot threads. It actually left right in the middle of a battle, but here, because the season was so much shorter, it felt like I was cheated. It felt like I was cheated. Like, I know, again, they probably have a reasonable explanation, but it really brought the anime down quite a few points for me. But in the end, this is still an amazing series. To anybody who hasn't, I highly recommend going back and watching from season 1 up until the end of season 2. As long as you're prepared for a really disappointing ending, you'll have a lot of fun, trust me. And finally, we have my pick for my favorite anime of the season, 91 Days. Now, I've already made a fairly extensive video on this show. I'll link it up here just in case any of you want to watch it. And I said in that video that depending on how the ending goes, it's going to turn this anime into either amazing or a complete waste of time. And with the way everything panned out, I don't think I can quite say that this was amazing, but it was still pretty great. The payoff delivered on everything that it promised. There was one comment on Crunchyroll that I absolutely agree with, 100%. The final episode felt a bit lackluster, but at least it was complete. In an era where we're constantly getting the, hey, wait for season 2 to come out type ending, I'm so grateful that 91 Days decided to tell a complete story. And again, it's a great story. For anybody who hasn't yet, please treat yourself. Go watch it. So in conclusion, I think the main thing that I took out of watching all the new anime that came out is that I really need to stop overhyping seasons. Seriously, like, I said in a previous video that, oh, this looks so good. This season looks amazing. It might even be better than spring. And it got nowhere near spring. There were just way too many shows that completely didn't pan out how I thought they would, that were just really disappointing. This is part of the reasons why I haven't made a first impressions of fall that's coming up and that actually looks pretty good. but I don't really want to commit to that because I don't want to make a fool of myself again. So overall, there were a few standouts. It wasn't a waste of time, I would say, but yeah, pretty big letdown. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you have any feedback, please leave a comment, and if you like this video and want to see more, please subscribe as well. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.